Hello and welcome to Art Conspiracy. I'm Amy, and today I want to talk about an art element that used to be something I dreaded, and now it's something that I really, really like, and that is perspective drawing. In particular, I want to talk about rulers. I had this come up twice recently with students of mine, where there was one drawing that my student was doing, and he said, "Oh, that my perspective doesn't look right. Should I use a ruler?" And I said, "Well, a ruler will make the line straight, but it still could be in the wrong place. Like it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not your line is straight. It just has to do with where you're going to put your line and at what angle." And this happened again with another student who happened to be my sister. So I don't think she'll mind if I use her as an example. Anyway, I'm going to give you a little tiny perspective lesson and also talk about this idea of using rulers. And give me a second. Okay, so let me share my screen. And I want to show you the situation. Okay, so here's the subject, this butter dish, and here's the drawing that my sister did. And I'm not showing this to embarrass her. And actually, she did some things right. She did some things very right. But you can see the difference in perspective. In particular, she's tilted the dish down toward us or raised her point of view a little bit higher than it actually is. So you can see more of the top of the dish, right? That's one thing. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But what she did right or so beautifully is she tilted the perspective so it's different than the source, but she was true to her changing it. So she was consistent. And here you can see the little knob on top runs right on the top of that. Well, she didn't put it up there because she intuitively, I think intuitively knew that because she tilted this further down, she needed to move that over. So she sort of took the basic idea of this butter dish and changed the perspective, but was consistent. What was her mistake, which isn't a very big mistake at all, and she's really close, is that the front of this always it needs to be bigger than the back, and the back line is slightly bigger. Anyway, because the object is so short, it doesn't really make that much difference. But perspective drawing, and let me just actually I have another to show you kind of how you would push that perspective. Perspective drawing is a combination of what you see and what you know to do. So sometimes you just have to make it look right, even though it might not look right to your eyes. Oh, okay, it's got to get bigger, and you make it so. So let me just give you a little example. Okay, so here's that butter dish. Okay, so forget the dish for a second. Let me just show you this. So this dish could be a dish, it could be a bed, it could be a book, it could be anything that is like a square or a rectangle or some kind of blocky thing. In 2-point perspective, okay, this is 2-point perspective, the thing that's closest to you is going to be the biggest. So in this case, I will use this line is going to be the closest to us. So if anything, that will be bigger. It may look exactly the same, but it will never be smaller. It will always get bigger. So let's say we have just kind of a book situation. So here's the front of our book. And then here is, let's say, here's the back of our book or the side of our book. And so these are always going to get smaller. See that? Eventually, way out here, they're going to join, but we're never going to see where that happens. But it's this, and then you have the top of it. And there you have your box. It's not perfect, it's a little wonky, but that's basically good 2-point perspective. Okay. And so it's also this relationship of the side, how big this is versus how big this is, even going straight up. And that's where my sister went a little bit off. How big this is versus how big this is. So anyway, when we start, we're drawing perspective. Using a ruler is not going to help us if we don't know where to put the angles. all a ruler does is make a perfectly straight line. So I don't see how that's very helpful. So when I teach perspective drawing, I say, okay, we'll start with the biggest thing here, but we're going to work really light. And we're going to kind of ballpark. And then we might start to say, oh, okay, is this bigger than this? Yeah, doing pretty good. Okay, now here's our top. Okay, and that's like there. I'm just kind of faking it. And then I get the particulars about the shape of it, if that's important. And then this ledge is going to be here. This will be parallel to this. Kind of fun. Butter dish. Here we go. That looks pretty good. And if you wanted to like really be wonky and playful, I mean, this is just our inspiration. So, we can do whatever we want. As long as this is bigger, we can play with what this butter dish looks like. It could look like this. Looks a little bit like a toaster now. All right, let's make it a toaster. There's a toast popping up. Whatever, but perspective drawing is to be played with. And if there was a table here, there's a table back, the table would be a little bit getting bigger at us, right? So this line would fan out. Look at that perspective. And this would get bigger too. Everything gets bigger as it approaches us. This is a little tiny perspective lesson, okay? Let's go back to this because another aspect of perspective is the light and dark. When something turns in space, there's often a shift in the light. And that reinforces our sense of perspective. Put that little shadow up here. That's kind of fun. There we go. There's a shadow here. Underneath. And before you know it, you got a masterpiece. Okay, and I just want to say something else too while I'm thinking about this. Now, I was wondering like why somebody would think a ruler might help them. And it occurred to me that when we draw, and I teach my students, it's like even if your pencil is here, you should be looking where you're going, right? And that helps you make a nice line, right? It's like setting your GPS coordinates. I'm going to be here and then I'm going here. So you're always looking, not just where your pencil is, but where you're heading. And maybe if you use a ruler, you see the expanse a little better and maybe it helps you perceive it. Having said that, using a ruler makes everything really stiff and stilted. So I'm not a big fan typically, but if you want a really straight line, here is my tip. Let's say here's my table line and I want it to be pretty straight. I make it really light with my ruler. And then I freehand to draw it. So it ends up not perfect. It doesn't feel stiff like a ruler line, but I have a little tracing of that perfectly straight edge to help me. Does that make sense? I'll do it again. Let's say I want this perfectly straight. I'm going to be really light. Can barely see it. And then I do it by hand. And it's straight enough, but it's got a little bit of humanity in that line, because I think lines are absolutely beautiful. And I like to see the hand of the artist. So that's your little perspective lesson. I'm teaching a class. It's called Playful Perspective. And I say, learn the rules, lose the ruler. Because we do freehand, we push it, we make things a little exaggerated. We learn the rules, what rules we can break and versus what rules we have to adhere to, like things getting bigger. You can't break that rule. Learn all about ellipses. And anyway, it's really fun. So I'm going to finish this up with this final little frame that's got information if you are interested. And Rita, my sister, thank you for letting me use your butter dish example. And I will see you guys. Get this down. I'll see you later. All right. Go back a second if you haven't written it all down. Bye. Art conspiracy.